Zillow just told you what your home is worth. I'm going to show you why that number is probably wrong. We're going to take 3 properties examples in Uptown, the French Quarter, and Metairie. Pull up the Zestimate on each and then walk you through the logarithm what it actually missed. I'm Margaret, born and raised right here in New Orleans. And before real estate, I traded currencies for Citibank in New York. I read data patterns for a living. So trust me when I say a number without context isn't a price, it's a guess. So let's start with Uptown, and I'm going to use a block that I know personally because I own property on it. Pull up Audubon Street on screen, the block between Magazine and Camp. This is one of the best examples I can show you of why automated valuations fall apart in New Orleans. Because within maybe 200 feet, you have several properties that tell completely different price stories. Start with 206 Audubon. That property is currently under contract at around $1.3 million. That will impact our pricing. Right next door is 208-210 Audubon Street. That's our property. We purchased it many years ago for just over $510,000. Put another $100,000 into it since then. So the real basis is north of $610,000. What did the automated estimate come back with? $480,000, less than the purchase price alone before a single dollar of renovation work. Then you've got 212-214 Audubon Street. That property sat completely vacant for nearly 20 years because the heirs couldn't reach an agreement on what to do with it. Nobody living in it, no maintenance, no updates. Sitting empty on one of the better blocks in Uptown while the clock ran on the condition of the structure. Eventually, one heir was able to gain ownership, completed a full renovation, and now it's rented out. But think about what that property looked like in the logarithms data during those 20 years of vacancy. No rental income, deferred maintenance accumulating invisibly, no transaction to generate a clean comp. An automated tool has no way to read that story or account for the recovery in value once someone finally put real money into it. Directly behind our property, the situation is completely different. That property was a teardown. Yes, we are still in Audubon Park, Riverside, sold as a distressed asset, demolished, and now there's new construction going up on the lot. The logarithm sale price on that address and may well be using it as a comp, but a teardown sale is land value, not improved property value. Folding that number into a valuation model for the renovated homes on the same block introduces noise that pulls the estimate in the wrong direction. 4 properties, 1 block. Values that span from $400,000 range to well over $1 million. And the logarithm working from zip code data and nearby sales can't tell them apart. Here's why it fails so completely on a block like this. An automated tool doesn't walk through the house. It doesn't see the quality of the renovation, whether the work was permitted or inspected, or whether it was the kind of cosmetic update that looks right in photos but hasn't touched the electrical panel or roof decking. It doesn't read the floor plan and understand whether the layout works for the way buyers actually live, or whether it's a quirky historic configuration that narrows the buyer pool. It doesn't know that a property sat vacant for 2 decades because of heir dispute, and it can't measure how much of the recovery in value came from the specific renovation decisions someone made after finally getting control of the title. It doesn't account for rental income potential, which on a block like this can vary significantly based on unit mix and condition. It doesn't distinguish between an arm's length sale and a teardown transaction where the land was the only thing being priced. And it doesn't factor in the Historic District Landmarks Commission overlay, which governs what any new owner can and can't do to the property going forward. And that directly affects what a buyer will pay. The 206 Audubon situation makes the point clearly. That property is under contract near $1.3 million. Our property next door got an automated estimate of $480,000. They're on the same block, in the same zip code, probably within 100 feet of each other. Even a logarithm sees them as comparable. Price impact is obvious. Any buyer who has actually walked both properties knows they're not. That's the Uptown lesson. Pricing cannot be done by zip code, by neighborhood, or even by street. It has to be done property by property. The gap between $480,000 and $1.3 million isn't an anomaly. It's what New Orleans real estate actually looks like when you understand what you're looking at. Uptown makes the logarithm look overconfident. The French Quarter makes it look lost entirely. And the ways it fails there are even more specific. The French Quarter is one of the most misread markets in this city, and I mean that specifically for automated tools. The first thing to understand is who actually lives there, or more accurately, who doesn't. The majority of properties in the quarter are second homes or pied-à-terres. People who want a base in the city for Jazz Fest, for Mardi Gras, for long weekends, for the kind of life New Orleans offers that nowhere else does. They're not primary residents. They're not full-time renters. They're owners who use the collectively want it there when they want it. The buyer profile is completely invisible to an algorithm. When an estimate gets generated on a quarter property, it sees small square footage, construction that dates back centuries in some cases, and a thin comp pool. It generates a number that looks plausible on the surface, but it has no idea whether that property can produce income when the owner isn't there. And in most of the quarter, the answer is that it can. Pull up this listing on the screen. What you're looking at is a Creole cottage, low profile, no front porch, rooms that front to back, thick masonry walls built to handle a Louisiana summer before air conditioning existed. Now 2 blocks away, you might find a Spanish courtyard townhouse, wrought iron balconies, central courtyard, commercial space on the ground floor, and a residential unit above. Same neighborhood, completely different asset class, different buyer pool, different price ceiling, different set of considerations. An algorithm pools them together because they share a zip code. A local buyer knows they don't compete with each other at all. But the factor that moves prices in the quarter more than almost anything else right now is short-term rental eligibility, specifically the lack of it. The city's short-term rental overlay rules are block-specific, and in most of the French Quarter, short-term rentals are prohibited entirely. You cannot legally list your property on Airbnb. You cannot offset your carrying costs with rental income when you're not there. For a buyer considering a second home or a pied-à-terre, that's a real financial constraint that should affect what they're willing to pay. It limits the asset to personal use only, and it means the property has to justify its price purely as a lifestyle purchase, not as an investment that generates returns. Zillow doesn't price that prohibition in it. It sees a quarter property with certain square footage and certain nearby sales, and it generates a number without adjusting for the fact that the buyer is taking on full carrying costs, mortgage, insurance, taxes, maintenance, with zero income potential to offset them. That's a meaningful difference from a property owner in another neighborhood that can legally rent short-term and generate several $1,000s a month when the owner isn't using it. The algorithm treats them as comparable. An informed buyer does not. On top of that are the Vieux Carré Commission restrictions. You can't gut renovate a Creole cottage and flip it into something modern. The approval process is real and guidelines are strict, and compliance costs add up quickly. For a buyer who understands that going in, it's a protection. It preserves the character of what they're buying. For a buyer who doesn't, it becomes a surprise cost they didn't budget for. Either way, it affects the real price, and none of it shows up in this estimate. Then there's insurance. Older construction in the quarter means masonry, aged systems, and in some cases foundations that have settled over generations. The elevation certificate on a quarter property can tell a completely different story than you'd expect from a neighborhood that's been standing since the 1700s. Some of these buildings sit higher than people assume. Others don't. The difference in the annual insurance costs between 2 properties that look nearly identical from the street can run into thousands of dollars per year, a carrying cost that directly affects what a buyer can afford to pay at closing, and an algorithm has no clean way to price it. The quarter is a lifestyle purchase. The algorithm prices it like a data set. Those 2 things don't produce the same number, and the gap between them is where buyers either find value or overpay, depending on whether they understood what they are actually buying. Now let's step outside of the city limits, because Metairie throws its own curveballs, and in some ways, it's the neighborhood where the algorithm works the most confident and gets it the most wrong. Metairie is where the algorithm feels most at home. Suburban grid, consistent lot sizes, newer construction, plenty of recent sales to draw from. From a data standpoint, it looks like a clean market. Lots of comps, predictable square footage pricing, homes that were built in recognizable decades with standard materials. If you were designing the ideal neighborhood for an automated valuation tool, Metairie would be close to it. And that's exactly the problem. Pull up this listing on the screen. Ranch-style home, slab foundation, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, 2-car garage, built in the early 1980s. This estimate looks reasonable. Honestly, it looks like it might even be right. The number fits the neighborhood pattern, it aligns with nearby sales, and nothing about it raises a flag at first glance. But here's what the algorithm cannot see from its data set. Flood zone designations in Metairie don't follow neighborhood lines. They follow elevation contours, drainage basin boundaries, and FEMA mapping decisions that get updated on a rolling basis. Two houses on the same street, same block, same construction era, same square footage, can sit in completely different flood zones. One carries a standard homeowner's policy with a modest flood rider. The other requires a full national flood insurance program policy with annual premiums that can run several $1,000s or more per year. Over a 30-year mortgage, that's a real number. And the zestimate on both properties is going to look nearly identical. Elevation is the variable that drives this, and it's specific. We're not talking about dramatic differences in terrain. We're talking about a few inches of slab height. A home that sits 4 inches higher than its neighbor might as well be in a different financial universe when it comes to what you'll pay for flood coverage every year. Lester Coa TWFG Insurance can pull a sample quote that makes this concrete. 2 comparable properties, 2 flood zone designations, and the annual cost difference laid out side by side. That number has a direct effect on what a buyer can actually afford to pay at closing, because the bank accounts for carrying costs in the debt-to-income calculation. An algorithm doesn't work backward from insurance costs. A good local agent does. School district lines add yet another level. In Jefferson Parish, the attendance boundaries don't follow the neighborhood geography the way you'd expect. One block feeds into a school with a strong rating. The next block over, same subdivision, feeds into an entirely different school. For buyers relocating here with children, that's not a footnote. It's often the deciding factor on which house they'll pay a premium for and which one they'll pass on regardless of price. Zillow's estimate doesn't adjust for which side of that invisible line a property sits on. Then there are deed restrictions. Metairie isn't one subdivision with one set of rules. It's a patchwork of older developments, each with its own covenants, some of which restrict short-term rentals, some of which govern exterior modifications, some of which have HOA structures with dues and enforcement mechanisms, and some of which have restrictions that are decades old and rarely enforced but technically still on the title. For a buyer moving here from out of state, none of that is obvious from the listing page. For a local agent who has worked this area for years, it's part of the standard checklist before any offer goes in. This particular property sits in a preferred flood zone. That's the good news, and it does affect the price. But the school district line runs 2 blocks south of it, which means the buyer pool is narrower than the comp set suggests, because several of the nearby sales that fed the zestimate were on the south side of that line. So the algorithm pulled comps from a slightly different buyer pool and generated a number that doesn't accurately reflect what this specific house will attract. Not dramatically wrong, but wrong in the direction that costs you money if you don't catch it before you price it or make an offer. 3 neighborhoods, 3 completely different ways to the algorithm gets it wrong. So what does accurate pricing actually look like? So let's talk about what the right process actually looks like, because this is where the local expertise separates from a data pull, and it's worth being specific about what that means in practice. A real pricing analysis doesn't start with a zip code and a formula. It starts with the property's story. What is this house exactly? Not the bedroom count, the architectural type, the construction era, the condition behind the walls, what's been updated and when, what hasn't been touched in 20 years, and what the next owner will need to budget for before the place performs the way they expect. That story shapes everything downstream. Who the buyer is, what they'll pay, which other sales actually tell you something useful about this one. Comparable selection is where that judgment gets applied, and it's genuinely an art. You don't pull the last 3 sales in the zip code and call it research. You ask which sales actually represent the same buyer making the same decision. A Greek revival on a deep lot near Audubon Park is not a comp for a Camelback 6 blocks closer to the interstate, even if they closed in the same month at similar square footage prices. The buyers who want those 2 properties are not the same people, and the things they're willing to pay a premium for don't overlay the way the data suggests. Before real estate, I spent years in market analysis at Citibank. The work there was reading data patterns, spotting outliers, and understanding when a number was telling the truth and when it was hiding something. The asset class is different now, but the discipline is identical. When his estimate looks plausible but the property has variables the algorithm can't read, short-term rental eligibility, elevation certificate, a historic tax credit the seller never pursued but the buyer could activate, that's an outlier the data is hiding. And the gap between the number on the screen and the real price lives inside that outlier. Here's how those variables actually fold into a price. Flood zone designation and elevation certificate affect annual insurance cost, which affects carrying cost, which affects what a buyer can qualify for. Short-term rental eligibility changes the income model, which changes the investor-buyer pool and the ceiling they'll reach. Historic tax credits available on certified historic structures in Louisiana can offset a meaningful portion of qualified renovation costs, which changes the math on what a buyer should pay for a property that needs work. None of these live cleanly in an algorithm. All of them live in a conversation with someone who has worked this market long enough to know which questions to ask before the offer goes in. For buyers relocating here, accurate pricing is protection. It protects you from paying a premium on a property that carries hidden costs the listing didn't surface. The flood insurance gap, the deed restriction, the school district line running 2 blocks south. It also protects you from walking away from a property because the estimate looked low when the real story was that the algorithm missed income potential that changes the investment case entirely. Both mistakes are expensive. Both are avoidable with the right analysis up front. The goal isn't to beat the AI, it's to understand what the AI can't see and build the price from there. Why this matters for you. Whether you're buying, selling, or planning a relocation to New Orleans, the number Zillow shows you is a starting point. It's not a strategy, and it's not a price you should negotiate from without understanding what's underneath it. The stakes are real. Trusting his estimate without local context can mean overpaying by $30,000 on a property that looks like a deal but carries flood insurance costs that weren't priced in. It can also mean leaving $40,000 on the table because your listing price came from comps that didn't reflect the short-term rental eligibility your property has and your neighbors didn't. These aren't hypothetical scenarios. They happen in this market regularly, and they happen to smart buyers and sellers who simply didn't have the right information at the right time. New Orleans rewards people who understand the micro market. The city is built in layers: architectural, historical, regulatory, geographic. And the value of any property here sits at an intersection of all of them. That intersection looks different on every block, which is exactly why a tool that averages across zip codes will always miss something that matters. This is the work I do as a realtor, not just finding the right property in the right neighborhood, but making sure the price reflects everything the listing doesn't say: the elevation certificate, the overlay zone, the school district line, the renovation history, the insurance picture. AI sees data, and local expert sees the full picture. In New Orleans, that difference is worth real money, sometimes tens of thousands in either direction. Hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell so you never miss an update. And check out the next video where we take you to Mandeville, a small town on the North Shore that carries the highest school ratings in the entire state of Louisiana. If you have kids or you're just looking for a quieter pace without leaving the greater New Orleans area, you won't want to miss it.